shall not be infringed. It's 25 July 2018, and this is General Welfare Tendency on the air. C'est magnifique. Ce n'est pas la guerre. Okay, hi all. I'm your genial host, resident noisemaker, and political maven Kevin McFoy Dunn, and this is the General Welfare Tendency on the air, here to smash undemocratic institutions everywhere. And speaking of undemocratic institutions, the Georgia GOP runoff. Where to begin? Well, there's not really any place where to begin. A gibbering lower primate won over a slightly less inclined to gibber lower primate. Yay, or something. Brian Kemp, who lives right here with me, sort of, in the beautiful burg of Athens, Georgia. And he's running for governor. I can only express despair at the fact that basically the entire white male population of the state is going to vote for this guy in November. His viciousness, his vapidity, and his, as far as I'm concerned, probably criminal, certainly unethical behavior respecting the voter rolls of Georgia and the data. He's part of the let's make sure no illegals vote now. Have you any idea how few illegals vote? Honestly, we got numbers. Oh, numbers. Well, we don't believe in those, do we? But anyway, so yeah, he's the GOP boy. I don't know. He'll probably win. It's a depressing reflection on the moral quality of this state, but hi. I don't know, farts all over. He might be starting to warm on me. I was going to add, you're starting to warm on me. I put this on my Facebook page. I brooded about many places. Please tell me, what idiom of English is it in which you say starting to warm on me? Now, and my theory about this is that what happened is that the man, who obviously is not one to be contradicted or corrected, and want to be thinking of himself as a busy man, got stuff to do, had made himself so obnoxious by the time they shot that segment that once he blew the line from, you're starting to grow on me, or whatever, or I'm starting to warm up to you. Who knows what the line was actually supposed to be? I'm pretty sure no actual human wrote that intentionally. Anyway, so he looks over at the crowd, and does the crew, rather, and gives them that sort of deranged Elvis smirk sneer of his, as if to say, hey, how'd I do? And they all hate him by now, so they're just like, that was great, Mr. Kemp. Because that's what Mr. Kemp wants to hear. That's what he and his ilk always want to hear from everybody surrounding them, just how damn great they are, and how much they deserve to keep every penny they ever make, notwithstanding that they might make it by, let's be polite and say, sharp practice. His opponent went to Yale Law School. I don't know where to begin with this. It's obviously the case that Stacey Abrams is the most qualified candidate. If this were a one-party state, I would at least be voting for her as opposed to him. But of course, if this were a one-party state, neither she nor I would either get to run or vote. So I don't know what to do. So we're all Democrats here, So the general welfare tendency, needless to say, gives its unqualified endorsement to the frightening, scary leftist Ms. Abrams, and I hope she beats him like a drum. My prediction is that that's not going to happen. A lot of factors would have to come into play, and not that I'm a big fond fan of this sort of thing, but he really old-fashioned shoe leather employed to the end of getting people out to vote. Even, Mr. Pie in the Sky futurist, blue skyer dude that I am, will acknowledge that there's going to be no substitute for it this time around, and certainly not little, squibs like this bit of business here. So, I wish her well, and if I have a buck or two, I will send it to the campaign, and I strongly urge those of you who have lots of bucks or know someone with lots of bucks to do the same. So, anyway, Democrats. We have some fuss and bother going on over there. For instance, there appears to have been a little confab of centrist Democrats basically scared to death of Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. I mean, that appears to be the entire focus of everything, because apparently, and this was on Stevie Colbert last night. I didn't quite follow it because it seemed more like a parody than anything else, but apparently it was straight. This self-proclaimed conservative woman writing on Patch or something. I didn't even know that still existed. I could be wrong about that. But it was a published piece of some sort. And listening to Ocasio-Cortez and watching the wild whooping throngs advocating a responsible distribution of basic social goods in, a society. She said something to the effect of, I could see the attraction of free healthcare and education there, but for the grace of God go I. Stevie said something to the effect of, yeah, boy, that would be terrible. Parents' worst nightmare. Yeah, your college-educated daughter? She saw the doctor. She's gonna be fine. Yeah, that's pretty terrible. Which just goes to show how deeply into it the algerist faction in this republic is. The people who still believe that merit is the primary determiner of where you get in life. And as for those mere socio-political conditions out of which your situation may have arisen, well, phooey, kids. It's just like, I don't know. Anyway, so they're all out screaming and yelling again. They're all worried about Bernie, which is another interesting issue, because I have suggested in earlier installations of this that I'm not really interested in the personalities of the candidates. You could, get, gosh, I mean, practically anybody, a meek, mild council person from somewhere in the more liberal reaches remaining of Minnesota, which I guess is probably 2 suburbs of Minneapolis, St. Paul at this stage of things. But it's the principle that counts. Now, this principle, this one right here, the particular one, I'll read it again. I love to read it. I'll read it all the time. Alex Jones reads stuff over and over again. Also takes off his shirt. That won't be happening. Yes, no member of our common species may be consigned to immiseration and humiliation by the action of society as expressed through the state. Now, I don't know that necessarily right off the bat means, full communism or anything, but it does certainly suggest that there is inevitably a social dimension to everything that happens. And your little gang of, centrist Democrats, who aren't even really centrist, is Charlie Pierce, who has very, very, very little time for these guys, says they're not centrist Democrats, they're conservative Democrats. And they are absolutely wedded to staying with the folks who work hard and play by the rules trope that Clinton was so fond of. The question having been, even back then, 20 years, 30 years almost now, is like, well, whose rules? Exactly who made those rules up? Did anyone get any say in how, your boss was going to tell you that that job that involves you sitting down and not talking to anybody all day was simply not possibly done remotely? That's... Who made up that rule? I lived for 12 years and change under that one. Drove 37 miles a day total, which I know is not much of a commute in these days of modern times, but it was ruinous to me, particularly to the extent that I was fully aware of its unnecessity. There was no need for it. But these conservative Democrats are very much committed to simply carrying on with the same nonsense. Let's see, this was... here's a bit of business that was from Politico, or Tiger Beat on the Potomac, as some people have been known to call it. Apparently, superdelegates are not real happy about the plan we've got coming down the pike in the party, where superdelegates are going to be somewhat diminished in their capacity to just put their big old party poobah thumbs on the scale, which they did last go round, and which doing should have been of no surprise to anyone. But anyway, if I understand this correctly, they're going to be... Ouch. Really don't need to put my eye out on camera, although it would boost ratings. Clicks, bitches. Where we go here? Oh yeah. The propriety of Bernie Sanders supporters since the Vermont senator's defeat in a bitterly contested 2016 primary would prohibit superdelegates from voting on the first presidential nominating ballot at a contested national convention. Now that, to me, barely sounds like a diminution, because it's like, well, fine, you'll vote on the second ballot. How long can it take? You guys in a hurry? Oh, I got like a tea time at 9. Let's get this over with. We ain't heard the speech tomorrow. I could just, just watch it online while I'm having drinks, whatever. No, it's it just doesn't work that way. And when we come back, we'll tell you various ways about how it could work. And we're back. It's almost as if we had sponsors or something. I know this doesn't work like that. So apparently it's a big concern to them that it might go 2 ballots, and this goes to the heart. And why? Charlie Pierce is a touchstone of mine. He used a phrase I'm very fond of in these contexts. He used a different verb. He said, "Don't frighten the horses." Apparently, the idea that unanimity might not be reached instantaneously within the party is just an insufferable concept. I think I mentioned last week the consternation that broke out when Ocasio-Cortez mentioned the possibility of a left analog of the Freedom Caucus. I was just like, oh my God, kill me now. And various other sage reactions. The Democratic Party is still largely in the thrall of people who they're corporate people. They still view everything as a kind of a feeder system for business. Deep in their hearts, they still hold to the old Calvin Coolidge aperçu. The business of America is business. The delicious tautology. I guess it's a tautology, is it? Write me up, correct me if I'm wrong. I'll take the demerits. But I'm sure he did say that. If he didn't, he would have been a good, maybe it was Hoover. Actually, now I think about it, whatever. I barely do American history. But, they just want the machine to run smoothly, and compromises, they'll make them if they have to. So, extending into this is, I don't know, maybe envy for the RNC last year, which, ran like America's Got Talent, minus any talent, whatever. And the guy won. So maybe they're just terrified of the spectacle of actual democratic fisticuffs, small d, taking place on the floor. And that's where the general welfare tendency comes in. The plan is to counter the superdelegates, no matter how little power they might have at that point. They'll still have some power, and they are unaccountable. They are free range. They are free range, and they are free to do whatever they want to. Of course, they were selected by the hierarchy, so they will do what the hierarchy wants. And the hierarchy will want one of the probably relatively obvious possibilities being brooded about now. Somewhere around 30 names have been cited at one time or another as possible candidates, and this, and not anything particularly unusual here. 5 months out from the midterms. But a coronation is the last thing the Democratic Party needs. And to the extent that the DNC puts its thumbs on the scale again, both thumbs, possibly other appendages as well, there's going to be a drive to rapid consensus where we all agree that surely this person is dead smack dab in the middle of American thinking, period, ignoring the fact that fully half of it to the right is just unacceptable. The half off to the right, as half of American thinking is not usable as a plan for action or even a rationale for developing a plan for action for anybody calling him, her, or their self a Democrat. Sorry. You can say what you want about what FDR had in mind while he was putting this all together. Yes, he was a patrician, and yes, he was infected by all the various failures of humane imagination that pretty much any privileged white person was prone to at the time. All that said, and you could say the same thing of Lincoln, mutatis mutandis, he was looking to move towards a regime of social goods at least as expansive and to some degree put together for the same reason as the one that Bismarck introduced in Germany. Now, of course, one reason Bismarck did it was that a reasonable old age pension and other sorts of social goods were intended to completely defang the trade unionists whom they were going to start locking up or otherwise debilitating in one way or another as soon as that went through. I wouldn't go so far as to say Roosevelt had that in mind, but I'm certainly sure he wanted to defang the Reds, whom he had the good sense not to equate necessarily with trade unionism. But the Democratic Party has been the party of social goods for basically, what is it? Carry the bomb. 9 years, give or take, and that's one of the reasons that the plutocratic cohort has done its level best through theory, through outright intimidation, through the deployment of the one weapon they have, and one and only one, which is the greatest of the means of production, markers of value, or as we like to call them in common parlance, money. They've been gunning for the Democratic Party that entire time. There was the general warfare going on between the two parties up to December 7th, 1941, and everybody kind of said, oh, okay, let's be quiet about that now. And the war was over, and then there was Truman, and Truman had the Square Deal, which meant to somewhat strengthen what Roosevelt was doing, and then Korea and the Reds and the bomb, which Harry was the first one to use, sort of got in the way, and the next thing you know, we have Eisenhower, who was basically, in a lot of ways, Obama, and reciprocally. So that sort of damped things down a little bit. Matter of fact, the lost comedy that everyone boo-hoos about all the damn time. Well, not everyone. Certainly old Potato Head Matthews over there on MSNBC. I call him Potato Head because he's Irish. Also, he slightly resembles a potato, but with hair. That's where this story begins its career through the annals of American politics, because the Democrats and the Republicans had pretty much agreed to agree on how very, very bad communism was, and how it did sort of just keep the old train rolling. But then Brown versus Board of Education came in, and the eponymous begetter of what I like to call the Buchananites went just absolutely crazy, and then we go from John Birch Society to Barry Goldwater, who in comparison looked actually sort of rational at the time. I'm prepared to entertain the idea that Goldwater was misunderstood. But things just began to come apart at that point. Johnson gets in. The relationship between the Great Society and Vietnam is complicated beyond my scope of actually understanding, and certainly beyond anything I can say right here, but it sure looked good in 65, Gulf of Tonkin incident notwithstanding. Who knew how bad it would get. But the war vitiated any capacity Johnson had to hang on to his accomplishment another term to foster its development. He just had to walk away. Hollering kids sort of like me. I was too young to vote. Matter of fact, they didn't change the voting age until after I was I was already eligible anyway, or something like that. I can't remember when they did it. I know it was the early 70s. Correct me on that if I'm wrong. And thanks to what happened in 65, a mere 3 years later, the Southern Strategy was put in place, and it's just been a ride in a radio flyer down an extremely steep slope to hell ever since. With the targeting on the Democrats, being ratcheted up exponentially, as the phrase has it, every election season. Every election season, somehow or other, people simply wanting public institutions that benefit the public weal, the general welfare, if you will. Just enemies of God, enemies of commerce, enemies of good sense, enemies. It's basically enemies. The entire semiotic regime of enemies. It's filled up in every little niche with some new marker, some new symbol of that which is inimical to the regular people, all of whom somehow or other always seem to be white. How does this work? So, the Democrats have been getting beat from pillar to post here now pretty much throughout my entire life. They managed to elect Clinton by convincing some people that he was a Republican in disguise. Bill is, of course, not above executing a man who is in a condition of certifiable mental debility because, well, you know, he wouldn't have no more been president than his wife would have been a senator if she'd voted against the resolution enabling George W. Bush to do any damn thing he wanted to. This trimming happens over and over and over and over and over again, and a lot of it is a function of manufactured consensus. And super infra is what I'd like to discuss in the context of what has to be done to put a spoke in the wheel of that manufactured consensus. The chief moving element of it at the convention is the superdelegates. I don't see how it could be viewed any other way. And yes, go ahead and object all you want that the Bernieites, yeah, I was one, until I had to vote for Clinton, but I did, screaming and complaining the entire way and insisting that everybody had to do it. Adults had to go do that. Because yes, it's true, you can't always vote for the person that you think is the awesomest. But you can make damn sure you don't vote for a monster orange toadstool with the social and political intellect of a clam, for heaven's sake. But so, yeah, we all knew that they could do that. And he lost anyway in the primaries and caucuses, as superdelegates notwithstanding. That said, the superdelegates have to be definitively blocked one way or another, and a side effect of this, or at least the most effective means of doing it, is to throw the convention open. There can be nobody who has it sewed up by the time they walk in the door. There may be a favorite, there probably will be, whoever has the plurality, but there have to be some countervailing forces to get this discussion actually working. And Supra is above, Infra is below. Let me tell you about Super and Infra after we take a little break. So you got Super and you got Infra, you got above and below, you have super delegates. So what would be the antimatter superdelegate? Well, I'll tell you what it would be. It would be an infradelegate. That's what I'm calling the delegates I imagine being selected by means of the incredibly clever general welfare tendency method, which is, I will remind you, you cannot run a candidate in just one state for the Democratic primaries. And then again, I am not a specialist in Democratic Party rules. They're fixing to get changed in some measure. As of early in August, I believe that's when the superdelegate ploy that the Sanders faction has proposed will come up. So acquainting myself overmuch with them is probably not really useful at this stage of things, because among other things, to instantiate this little scheme I've got, I need like more people than me. So please tell people about this show if you think that anything I have to say here is of some merit, because I'll be blathering it at everybody until the Democratic Convention at least. So you're looking at 2 years right now from right now before I shut up. So I would like to try to expose this idea to as many people as possible. Anyway, so you have to have run in 2 states to actually be put in nomination at the convention. Well, that's fine. So what the general welfare tendency does is run in the Democratic primary or in the caucus, which I believe are the only 2 ways at the moment that Democrats select their presidential candidates. And you pair the states up. I'm in Georgia. My natural inclination is to imagine South Carolina, Alabama, and Florida. Some natural affinities, geographic affinities. Frankly, I don't care myself, because everyone will have signed off on the poison sentence right here. Everyone will have agreed that you can't starve people, or you cannot deprive people of, no matter what you think about laziness or willpower or any other of a number of evanescent concepts that people have used to take things away from people throughout history. And no matter what you think about that, there's a floor. There is an abundance still. Give it another 150 years of global warming and we'll see. But right now, there is an abundance of both abstract substance, aka money, and material goods, certainly to assure that no citizen in this republic goes to bed saved by choice under the stars. It can be done. And this is one of the things that I find best about Ocasio-Cortez, as a matter of fact, because she has explicitly described housing as a human right. It's straight up a human right. There's no excuse for it. Oh dear, public housing brings crime and disease. Well, you know, if you redefined crime to not include so many damn things having to do with mere human peccadillos, and didn't make a profit-making industry out of locking up the people you've defined as criminals, pretty much just arbitrarily by human historical standards, you know, maybe you could get rid of some of the crime problem that way. I'm not saying our culture doesn't have what appear to be intractable problems with the way we exist as a society and in relation with each other, but come on now, seriously, that's your excuse for not putting a roof over somebody's head, particularly somebody with children. Let me stop here. I'm going to be a pain in the ass because it's my show. There's this thing that the soon to not be Cox Industries local TV station in Atlanta, WSB TV, does prior to the school year every year. It's called Stuff the Bus. They get a school bus and they pull it up to some place, some parking lot near Walmart or something, with whom they run a promotion, or Walmart or whoever. It doesn't matter. It doesn't really matter. I shop at Dayton Hudson stores, A, because I like the Nicaragua coffee, but also B, because it's fair trade or something. I don't know. And also because they're not Walmart, because they're not owned by the Waltons. They're instead owned by those people that gave money to an anti-LGBTQ thing and then said, oh my gosh, we're sorry. So great, you win because you said you were sorry after you did some horrible, boneheaded, inhumane thing. Thanks. Anyway, so they take a bus, they pull it up in the parking lot, celebs come out, and they do peppy segments on the news. By the way, the station WSB TV, I will bet you right here, right at this moment, 25 July 2018, Sinclair will buy them. Because the Cox is divested, let it be known, the stations are on the block. I think they've got 12 or something nationwide. The stations are on the block because they're doing some other merger. Gee, if I were a real reporter, I would actually be able to tell you what it was. But, you know, I don't care, because it's just going to be eaten by the giganticer frog of some other, capital pond-dwelling creature eventually. Anyway, so if I follow the, balance sheets of everyone involved, I guess would be interesting. Anyway, so fine. There they are, and what are they doing? They're getting private citizens to come and bring school supplies because, and a little weather person said this just with the most earnest kind of blind white privilege sort of almost hurt in her voice, and says, you really can't succeed unless you have good school supplies, papers, crayons, tablets. What do you mean? Yeah, I mean, and this went on throughout the segment. It went on all weekend too, because they're collecting backpacks for the kids. Yeah, because, well, sorry, we can't buy you any paper. We couldn't do that because some guys involved in real estate speculation in Roswell drove up the theoretical value of homes people have been living in for a quarter century. And they got really, really mad because thanks to their crappy education over the last half a century, pretty much my entire life, pretty much since Sputnik, actually, quantificationists, call me up sometime and yell at me once we have our Skype functioning, which maybe today, we don't know. Not very likely, but it could happen. Because I did some stuff wrong with getting it set up or something. I don't know. I just anyway. So they won't pay their taxes. I think last week I referred to Benjamin Franklin's letter to Robert Morris, in which the first time in American history that I know of, anyway, the "it's our money" thing was adduced in the context of taxes. Franklin didn't have much to do with it. It didn't care much for that as an idea. But alright, I may go crazy and just read that later in the show. It's a really funny letter. He might have been a real estate shark. See Alan Taylor's American Revolutions. Important book. But he also was a most clever and most blunt writer. But they like good Americans throughout history. They can't see much past the block, past their own, and they don't want to pay taxes. So what happens? The property taxes get cut again, or the millage rate isn't increased enough to cover what they really need to cover, particularly for schools in the most disadvantaged districts. Oops, what are you gonna do? It's sad. All those poor little children need to work harder. Look, here's pencils with erasers. So yeah, they stuff the bus. That's what they do. We don't have any, reliable public goods. We have no sense of solidarity with our fellows, theoretical or real. We're all divided into, communities that are the powerless ones are complained of by the powerful ones. How dare you have a community? Be like us, the neutral people, who have no valence. Except for the ones over way over on the right of that little frame, the ones who are going, well, actually we do. Those guys. They got a community. So stuff the bus. They stuff the bus. And, God almighty, tell you the truth, I lost track of where I started on all this, which is fine. Because, honest to God, no one's watching this right now anyway, is there? That will change. So, let's see, what else did I write down here? Oh, yeah. Like the Bernie Kratz to be over. Anyway, so yeah, back to the infradelegates. That was it. I just get so wound up. Because, it's really infuriating. I'm living for the day I can get 10-minute, gulps of some of these libertarian morons that call in on other sites that do this, and they try to get them to understand there's actually a moral dimension of it, even if they can only see the one that involves the well, I worked for this and you didn't angle, which is the impenetrability of that is what's frightening. It's not even the assertion so much as that it simply isn't meaningfully discussable. By the time someone has acquired the intellectual tools to make it possible to get past that, and assuming that they don't, lapse into some kind of, weird, misunderstood Straussism or something, I just love to have a chat with them. So anyway, the usual suspects are going to try to control the convention as much as possible. Two, count them, two, states, adjacent states, whatever they are, I don't care, have a single nominee for the presidency, for the presidential candidacy. They're under the general welfare tendency, or whatever the analog develops into along the way. I don't care. It doesn't matter. You can call it the, free stuff and no war faction if you wanna. I mean, I don't care. It doesn't matter to me. It's just, this is what I call my thing, so that's what I'm calling it for now. But this coalition, this broad coalition, signed on to a statement of principles of some sort of a social democratic variety, gets together 753 delegates, which is more than enough to counter the superdelegates on that second ballot, which under the rules that Perez is favoring would actually be in force in 2020. And then just throw it open. Get out there. Make them work for it. Have a brokered convention, not in smoke-filled rooms, but out in the aisles of the convention. Conceptual bare-knuckleism. I mean, just stern words. Excuse me. Harsh words. Maybe even. Oh dear, we're just trying to save the Republic here. Excuse me that I might have gotten a little heated. Select someone who sells the left. For real. Someone you look them in the face, or at least their manager in the face, and get the story from them. So if nothing else, you can hold their feet to the fire later. Show them the declaration saying, "Do you agree with this? This right here." Let's pretend that I'm the focus. This whatever is the focus of it, and they point to that sentence and say, "Are you on board with this? Will you hew to this, come hell or high water?" Ask them all 4 or 5 of them. And the trick is, this is how it goes, and it'll go even better if they do this first ballot superdelegate layout thing. This candidate will have been, all 25 of these candidates will have been understood to have no existence as candidates beyond the first ballot, at which point they will say, "I release my delegates. Fly free, little delegates. Little infradelegates. Little, we're just guys who would, like social democracy. Sorry, I don't know anybody at Goldman Sachs, but, I have a basically humane view of reality, and without excuses. Or, well, we'll let them starve a little while longer. It'll be great. The New Jerusalem of every man his own investment banker, just like in the palmy days of Joe Nocera at the Texas Monthly, and he wrote that book, what was it, The Fiscalization of American Life. When that book came out in the 80s, they said, no, this is an appallingly bad idea. This is really bad. No one will really be their own investment banker. Investment bankers will be investment bankers. You will be their fodder. And you'll be easier fodder because you'll be playing the same game. They're like playing with manhole covers and you've got tiddlywinks. Come on. And it's just like, what's the matter with you? Anyway, so the 25 delegates, one by one, come down. The 25 candidates, one by one, come down the roll, and however it works out, whoever the state, the state official is who speaks for. They say, and so for so and so, and then an announcement gets made. Again, I don't know what the Robert's Rules of Order regime for this is, but I presume releasing delegates is a fairly normal proposition. Let them go! Off they go into the bush. And who knows where they light. That's kind of the idea. This will not be tidy. These people here, these people complaining about, oh no, it won't be settled on the first ballot. No, it will not. With any luck, it won't be settled on the 15th ballot. With any luck, it won't be settled on the 28th ballot. I don't care how long it takes. It's democracy. This is how conventions used to be. People used to, I mean, admittedly, the candidates were selected by thoroughly undemocratic means, and the factions involved were very frequently pulling for things that we find appalling and repugnant now. But I will say this, they would have, a literal fist fight on the floor from time to time. I'm not advocating that, but I certainly would like to see some heat. I want the heat to be brought and in such a fashion as not to be ignored by the left, by the Democratic Socialists, by the advocates of what we'll talk about again from last week a little later, social thought. Call it whatever you want. It has to do with people getting access to medical care, getting housing, getting income support and augmentation, getting education, not an education decided upon by mere utility. And I'll close that little story out with one phrase, one word: robots. So anyway, we're approaching the top of the hour. We're going to be trying to go the whole 3 hours today, but right now, taking a little break. We'll be back in 5. So, infradelegates. That's the plan. Take them to the convention and float them around. Another track, which I'm not emphasizing because it's not my particular little tub to thump, but it makes sense, is encouraging lots of candidates to run in this thing, apart from the the general welfare tendency presidential candidate corps is kind of a backstop. It's the candidate multiple candidate methodology is probably like method, I should say. Sorry. Is obviously on the face of it more reliable, but getting people to vote in the interest of producing, let's not say chaos exactly, but some fractiousness at the convention is contrary to the Grange-like spirit of Americans. It's like, well, gosh, aren't we sort of pulling together in this? Why would we want to produce... This is one of my favorite not English words. I probably don't pronounce it right, but I just like it because it's a Joyce joke when it's transliterated. Shirk. It's an Arabic term, Islamic theological term that means faction, the propensity to break into parties. People of goodwill, generally speaking, don't look for a fight. I don't. I mean, I'm obviously not punching Nazis right now. I'm sitting here in a studio, talking to, effectively nobody. But so that's pretty much not causing much of a stir. But there has to be some more discussion than just going to happen in editorial pages or even in party meetings. Although honestly, I attended business meetings of the DeKalb Democratic Party for a couple of years at one point, and I kept trying to figure out how rank and file party members got any input on policy, and the answer was always pretty much lick envelopes for 20 years. And then we'll think about letting you sit in a the policy meeting. Sit quietly, don't talk. I saw a guy at one of those meetings. He was, and now in fairness, it was sort of unfocused and off any topic that anybody was particularly talking about that day. But he was wildly passionate about some issue about Georgia Power plant funding. He was very much, anti-fission. And he was indulged, I'll give him that. They didn't do what Republicans doubtless would have done in similar circumstances and hauled him out, kicking and screaming because of the taser. But it was plainly the case. It just wasn't a discussion they wanted to have. Maybe they have it at the breakfast. I don't know. I never went to one. Because I didn't have any money for breakfast at that point. Thanks, entire American socio-political system. I wasn't working hard enough. That could be true, actually, in my case, but only I am entitled to say that. It's just any avenue through which policy and the making of it, and particular views on policy not held by the generality, can make itself known, is useful. And I think just making sure that somehow or other, no matter how much consensus there is, there are 753 delegates that are... I picked it because, ab urbe condita, that kind of thing. Just my little private joke. This is why it probably won't be the umbrella organization that does this, if anybody does it. But it outnumbers, if I'm counting correctly, the superdelegates by a reasonably healthy margin. And no matter how much of a block they transform themselves into, they will be at minimum denied the ability to force through a candidate. It's not to say that candidates will not come forward who will be worthy, that people who are not impressing me now will impress me later, that any number of variants could occur. One of them could outright sign off on a declaration of principles. The party could front load the platform. The ways of doing this are many and multiple, and that's redundant, but now I had this very plainly in my head there for just a second, and it just floated away. You have to forgive me, I'm old. It's also that this really, this entire panoply of discourse just evoked so damn much stuff that fleeting sparks of it, Silex scintillans, boom, they're just flashing here and there, and I try to grasp the fugitive fragments as they go by, and it has occurred to me in the time I gave myself to recover it. We have learned something from the Trump administration, and it is this, and I suppose we should be grateful to Donnie for this, if nothing else. Actually, probably nothing else. A great deal of what we thought was basically statutory, or if nothing else, so thoroughly well understood to be how it is done, was nothing of the sort. It was conventional methods of going about things, long hallowed forms, didn't have anything behind them, but just a sort of gentle person's agreement that this is the order in which these operations take place. And that's actually not a bad metaphor. It's not math. Turns out those operations could be done in any order, and some of them could be omitted entire. So it seems like any sniffiness about bad order in the context of the Democratic Party's internal operations, particularly in open convention, strikes me as just laughable at this stage in history. It's like, really? There's an entire cabal of what I refer to as the Sunnis trying to basically take the country and the government under their governance, and just tough for the rest of us. And karma is the word people like in this context. I actually am kind of bearish on the misapplication of it for, mere go around, come around stuff. But sometimes it does feel a little metaphysical. You'll remember there was this little war in Iraq, and the guy we were trying to oust was the head of an odious regime, indeed. Maybe not odious enough for us to kill about 1 million people, directly or indirectly, to get rid of him to no end, and on a lie that Hillary Clinton voted to ratify. But I've made that case before. I'll probably make it again before the show's over. But one interesting feature of Ba'ath, Iraq, was that the Sunnis, whereof Saddam was one, were a minority in Iraq. Members of the Shia sect, heterodox Shia sect, like it mattered to anybody in the, gosh, I don't want to say godless, because people are nervous about that, so they don't really say it, but certainly the sort of god-light West, the heterodox Shia, they were like, what, at minimum 60% of the population, probably pushing more like 65. The Sunnis were a minority, but they ran everything. They told themselves over and over again that they were the majority. And much of the nastiness that took place in Iraq, if you look at it dispassionately, was caused not by the occasionally noisy Shia, Muqtada al-Sadr. You may remember him. He resurfaced recently, I believe. It was the Sunnis. It was the Sunnis who, among other things, burned and dismembered the corpses of those contractors and hung the parts on that bridge in Fallujah. It was they. Well, this is the return of our, oddly enough, of our launching an unjust and unnecessary war to unseat those admittedly deserving jerks. Not Sunnis per se, but the Iraqi Sunnis. I want to make that distinction clear. Oh, by the way, just gratuitously, Bill Kristol, Sunni-Shia conflict in Iraq. Pop sociology. Anybody remember that? That's a good one. I've laughed about that one, except when I remember all the blood for ever since the war started. But in any case, so we got rid of some, or put in their place some people who needed being put in their place, although again not by a murderous police action launched on a lie. And as a result, I can't help but feel of that improvident adventure. We basically, it's as if a demon left their collective body and inserted itself into the collective body of the people that were most gung-ho about getting rid of them over there in Iraq, or at least, wresting from them their illegitimate power as a minority, running things. So now we have the Iraqi Sunnis running everything or the American Iraqi Sunnis running everything, because now we know there are no institutions. The joke, they like this over at Slate, because lol, everything is meaningless. And yeah, it sort of feels that way, but again, there is just no reason to get on your high horse about the sacred lineaments of the Democratic Party rules, the Democratic National Convention rules, the Democratic National Committee rules. And generally speaking, I think, leaping up on a dais and decking Joe Manchin is probably not a good idea, but I don't think we need to be too terribly concerned with some guy in a state that the Democrats are probably going to lose anyway, getting all upset about the fact that the convention has been prolonged by a few ballots in the interest of getting better candidates. So this is the plan. This is what General Welfare is trying to do. Would you like to be the candidate for Georgia and South Carolina? There isn't much in the way of a system of qualifications for it. You have to be of age, and generally speaking, we would like for you to have not committed murder. And we mean that both in the context of having actually done it and having been caught at it, because I don't know, that just feels disqualifying. But in any case, more of this cheery discourse will be coming down the pike after we take a little breath. So I am going to, I have, this is sort of, I don't know, sort of a silly thing to say perhaps, but I have some actually terribly clever Facebook friends. Everybody hates Facebook. I find that actually sort of sad, because I think Facebook has the virtue of not being cool anymore. I mean, honestly, I am an old man. I'm pushing 70. God help me, I have no idea what Instagram is for. There, I said it. And I'm proud of it. I don't. I honestly do not understand what the difference between one platform and another is. I realize, you can load stuff on in different sequences. You can do this and do that, and utility of one as opposed to another is debated. But honest to God, it's a place where you publish things in the oldest sense of the word. You bring it before the public. You let a selective public to some degree, but not necessarily. I set all my stuff, obviously, for the General Welfare Tendency page on Facebook. Please go see it. And my own page, my personal page, it's public. Anybody can see it. Not anybody can comment on it. I got into some fight with some guy in South Africa once over, some crazy ass racist stuff or I took it as racist. I would. Stuff he was promulgating. But it's a place. People chat. It's a forum. I always say that back in the days when it was really fashionable to say, "Oh man, I really hate television." Quaint old television. And it was a bone of contention between people. I would say that I watch television as much as anything. That I might do the modern equivalent of walking in the agora, that I might hear the opinions of folks. Men is actually more euphonious, but it's also like wrong. So what are you going to do? I'll tell you what I'll do. I'll leave it to Perseus or Juvenal or somebody to say that, and I'll just troll around on my Facebook page. What do we have here? Hi there. Hey, you know, I could, like, I could name check people, then they would come and look at the tape and say, I mentioned you. That would be so cheap. I would never do that. I would absolutely never do that. And Coolidge, and Benjamin Uzab, Akella, and Ellen McGrail. I would never do that. Seriously though, I love you all, otherwise you wouldn't be on my page. All more or less 600 of you. Ooh, now here's the thing that puts me in my mind of something, which is that I am looking at a bandmate of mine, very, very talented Ben, and he is standing next to a person I didn't get to meet when she was on the bill with us at a festival in at the east side in Athens. We played a gig. It was fun. And that would be Mariah Parker, who is the amazing young council person for Athens, Clark County, who took her oath on the autobiography of Malcolm X. I very much heart Mariah, if anybody that you know is listening to this, or you're listening to this, I want to have you on the show and put you on a stool right over there and talk to you about stuff. Like Ocasio-Cortez. I have a feeling you're sympathetic. Anyway, so scrolling through, what have I got? What have I got? You know, one of these days I'm going to actually look at Alex Jones instead of just pissing and moaning about him in the abstract, or, you know, on the basis the few tiny little clips I've seen, just to find out how he runs the show. I know he sells supplements and takes his shirt off. Honestly. And is also going to pay through the nose, I should expect, in the context of those Sandy Hook suits. And I hope he's busted back to, you know, basically, you know, homeless person. See how he likes it. But as Charlie Pierce suggested, it's very likely the case that he's gonna just pay a bunch of money and go to ground for a while figuring out how to monetize his next position, because that's what we do. So let's see. Wow, there's nothing much going on here. So without further ado, I'll switch over to something else. What's on Slate? I'm sure something will irritate me there. Slate's sort of used to be. I think Trumpism finally knocked them mostly out of their somnolence, but oh Lord, were they ever proud of themselves back in the Mickey Kaus days. Golly, glad he's mostly gone away. Now, gone away. I'm going to find out he's dead or something, and boy will I feel bad. Although he was alive and kicking at least 18 months ago, seems like. Anyway, yeah, and Jacob Weisberg used to sort of, he wasn't really a centrist, but he played one in magazines, that kind of thing. Speaking of which, oh dear, what do I see here? Whoa! Asita Nwanevu, who's definitely high on my list of people whom I would like to interview one way or the other. Centrism is dead, says he. Okay, I'll bite. Let's see. Centrism is dead. The deck reads, the left has already won the debate over which ideas should animate the Democratic Party. Really? I am unaware of this, although they are dumping on Third Way, which incidentally was the centrist gang that got together to talk about some more welfare to work requirements or something. Can they not understand? Can they not get through their heads? All they ever do when they do that is play the Republican game. The conservative game. Conserving what? I'll be waiting for an answer for that one too. Because I've never been able to figure it out. The better affected of them, I think, think, well, if we can just get a few people up above the waterline and prove that a little government's not a bad thing, then that may soften the climate. It won't. It will not. It never has. It's never going to. It's a pipe dream. It's a pipe dream indulged in effectively my entire life. Ever since Nixon, who proposed arguably a better healthcare provision system than the ACA. Again, not to speak ill of Obama, he did what he could. Or he did what he felt he could. I think he misjudged. Yeah. Whatever. But since the days of Nixon, it's been, and Clinton was the one who drove the nail in the coffin because he just ratified it. And these are warmed over Clintonistas too. It's just like the work hard and play by the rules form. Work hard. Maybe you can make some judgment about that. Play by the rules. Well, which rules? The rules. I know I'm beating this dead horse until a noisome goo flows out of apertures made in its hide by my iron rod. But it's important. Working hard, okay, fine, maybe. For an able-bodied person not suffering from any personality or psychological debilities, maybe you can make some approximate assessment based on crude measures like productivity, slightly more subtle measures like assessments of their integration into the workplace culture. Working hard. Okay. Was I working hard when I drove that 37 miles every day into Marietta and back from Edgewood Candler Park? I mean, was that part of the work? How do you assess the work? How much pain is required? I've never really been able to understand this, except in the context of the just the output measure, which can be conditioned by lots of things. But the play by the rules thing, I mean, there's the crude outer limit of it is like, does not, beat people half to death either within the confines of the company's walls or out in the street. That, sure, we can agree on that. Again, it's like the gross measure of productivity. Did you do as much as the guy next to you? Which, of course, if the guy next to you is like a champ cup stacker and somehow or other this job is very similar to cup stacking, or you clear 20 files a month because the standard has been determined that 20 is it, which of course gets increased to 40 files a month when you basically have various forms of office assistance and accounting programs and the rest to do it. But, and then there are the more subtle play by the rules things. What if this is just you're not designed to sit in a cubicle? And what if you are, God forbid, of an artistic or literary temperament? I don't know. What do you do? I could just go on and this. I have very little use for this as a metric, though, of where the sphere of concern should begin and end for merit. It's like, okay, well, you're kind of a slacker, and I'm trying to think of a rule you could break that was meaningful to me, basically, because I don't know. Did you take some terrible drugs, for instance? Well, generally speaking, I think in a well-regulated society, if you took some terrible drugs, the night before when you got home and had slept it off adequately to go do your job, whatever it was, probably you might not want to be doing lots and lots of oxy if you've got to drive a gigantic skip loader or something on the edge of a precipice. Odds are pretty good you probably don't want to do that. Will you have the responsibility to make that determination? I don't know. In a regime where your bad habits respecting drugs were not criminalized, I think you could probably get help a lot quicker. You might be more inclined even to say, you know, I drove the skip loader today while I was a little woozy. That's probably stupid. I'm going to go look for help because I don't want to kill anybody, as opposed to, I better keep this quiet because I might get drug tested and lose my job and go to jail. There's that. And then there are all the crimes associated with sex between consenting adults, most of which, except for the prostitution laws, are gone. I have mixed feelings about sex workers because I honestly do believe that the majority of them are probably products of abuse. And this is an acting out of the trauma. I could very well imagine if anyone were actually, getting in touch with me about this stuff yet, as someone might object. But Kevin, there are people for whom this is just a fine thing to do. To which I say, well, okay, well, if it's a fetish, maybe, how would I know what level at which, the fetishism was occasioned by some sort of trauma from abuse? I'm just suspicious about it. I don't want to throw baby out with bathwater. Just saying it's just absolutely fine. It could be statutorily fine without necessarily having to endorse it. Let's say. If you got to rid of this entire category of crime, I've just described body crime is what I've called it before in the past. I think other people have used this term too. Get rid of that whole category of crime. A lot of exclusion from employment would go away because a lot of people would not have stupid low-grade felonies or high-grade misdemeanors on their records. And of course, eventually, employers would stop the idiotic practice of drug testing people, or even, this is fun, I love this, the whole you can't have a job if you smoke cigarettes regime. Now, you know where this all comes from. This is a function of the healthcare provision problem. Is that companies don't want to pay for the new lungs for their employees. So that's the only reason. It's not like, gosh, I'd like to have you employed for like 60 years with me, which of course if we get rid of Social Security will become more and more likely. Another issue altogether. But I think Barbara Ehrenreich has spoken to this. Now I'd like to get her as a guest. That the whole regime of wellness programs and companies is basically an HR-driven phenomenon to the extent that it's just a desperate effort to hold the premiums down. And holding the premiums down is an unfortunate epiphenomenon to them. Just the whole regime of premiums, and they have to pay money for it, is that it is another valence of wage slavery. I love that term, don't you? Wage slavery. My entire working life was nothing but an exemplar of it. Except those little altitudos provided by buying things on credit. That was fun. resulted in 2 bankruptcies. What you gonna do? And I'm gonna think about what you and I are going to do right after this little break. Hey. Yeah, so, wage slavery. That's one of the recommendations about the UBI, interview in, Slate with, the person whose name I cannot remember at the moment to save my life, who's written the most recent pop book on the UBI, which has just been busting vessels all over the, centristosphere because free money. Who do that? It's a moral hazard part in. HR departments are the gatekeepers of safety, at least in a somatic context, because want to go to the doctor? Keep getting that report in every week, right on time. Make sure you read that spreadsheet the 5th time real good, and literally the 5th time. This is the person down the chain who gets the 5th read every time. It probably leads to promotion, if they're prepared to instantiate further oppression of the people who are still further down the ladder. At least that's what it always looked like to me. But I had a jaundiced view of it anyway, and in any case, I was in publishing. God help me. But yeah, they just, you gotta keep your job because otherwise you can't afford the insurance. That's one of the reasons Obamacare was so excoriated, because implicitly, if you don't worry about your health insurance, your labor mobility improves enormously right there. Well, yeah, to heck with you. I can go to the doctor, so, and I've got just enough money to get me through 2 months, so I'm done with your stuff. I'm out of here. That's really why they hated it. I mean, apart from the eye and fire sector, those guys did not want that endless cash cow, that kamadenu, that wish-fulfilling cow, ever taken out of their corral. Because you're chained to the job if you have no other means of going to the doctor. I take hypertension medication, and there was a very substantial period between my last job in 2008, after which I could find no more copy editing jobs. It was a miracle I could find that one. And when I went on the Medicare rolls a couple of years ago, there was a brief passage where I got in on an artist's tailored program, Kaiser administered. C4, I think, is the organization's name in Atlanta. I was on a Kaiser Gold plan, Platinum plan, actually, now that I think about it, for 2 years for something absurd a month, less than $30, rather less than that, actually. And that was cool, but on either side of that, it was like, find a friend, who is a physician, which was actually the most reliable um, regime I could get to, who would just write me the scripts, because it's, yeah, I'll tell you, I have no secret. Atenolol and diltiazem. Yeah, one's for the heart, one's for the hypertension. I honestly can't remember which. And your generics, 1,000 years in use, since Alfred the Great. So they're produced for nothing. They charge way too much for it because America. But still, even if I paid out of pocket and found the right pharmacy that had the correct generic policy, I was okay. Sometimes I'd go to a clinic, and at one point I think I was going every 6 months at least, and forking out the relatively small sum of around $80 just to get re-upped on the meds. Again, I could control at that point the generics I was getting, so that was fine. But it was dodgy. It was pretty frightening. I was never exactly sure, because you can't go to the pharmacy and say, "Look, here's the deal. I've got this chronic condition and these really cheap drugs that are absolutely not addicting in any way, and you have a paper trail of my having gotten them before. Could I please keep getting them?" You know what the answer to that is. And if I'd been more resourceful, I suppose I could have gotten them from Abu Dhabi or something, or wherever one gets mail order drugs from. But I'm not that resourceful, and many in my age cohort are certainly not that resourceful. So, yeah, they had me over a barrel. I had a very concrete representation of what it was like to be without insurance, without employment, etc., etc. Now, at the end of the period, there was this. I got lucky. It was only the front end. I've misnarrated this. Only the front end was dodgy and involved the clinics and things. The ACA went into force right at the moment that the Kaiser plan ended for me, so I was able to just transit over smoothly, and I was subsidized pretty heavily, so it didn't go up much. Went up some, but it was okay. It was still, I had health insurance with a pretty hefty deductible, and I could get my meds. That was no problem. Hey doc, yes, you get like quarterly re-ups and then go in for the exam. Yeah. So thank you, Obama, very much. That was that made what could have been an extremely unpleasant passage a lot more tolerable, and also made it marginally better for me not to have a job. I would have liked to be editing instead of doing absolutely nothing, if only because the money's better than doing nothing. But I was out from under the thraldom of the corporate, at least to that extent. And if they hate that, and they do, deeply, bitterly, and abidingly, if they hate that, just try to imagine what they think about the UBI. Answer is, it's death and hell on a stick, covered in carob. So let's see. Let me continue with what Osidon Nwanevu has to say. They called the centrist convention "Invite Only Opportunity 2020." God. All right. They are clever, aren't they? Let's see. Yeah, apparently NBC said it was basically a big group hug for those terribly, terribly concerned that bad old communists might be taking over their party, etc., etc. Well, I'm glad that it's felt that we won. This is sort of news to me. Oh, wow! Breaking news. At least it's breaking to me. What's this? Yes. Apparently. Oh, come on. Well, okay. I'll just not bury the lead in my trying to get this computer to work and say, hey, guess what? Remember that visit to the White House that Trump was all hot to have with Putin? Well, apparently it isn't going to happen. Let's see what the deal is. Okay. We are... And this is a statement straight from John Bolton. Believes that the meeting, quote, should take place after the Russia witch hunt is over, so we've agreed that will be after the first of the year. Yes, well, it's good to see that the tropes are stable. So anyway, goody. Well, fine. I'm glad the murderer is not going to be sitting basically feted as if he is feted, celebrated with lavish entertainment as if he were like an actual normal head of state instead of a vicious thug. C. Wright Mills was right. Look it up. So, that was entertaining. Notice what else do we have? I actually rather like chatting about breaking news, because it's just so damned entertaining. What else have we here? Down to the news sections. Oh, well, this is bad news. Apparently, the government attorney trying or in charge of the Maria Butina case is, golly. Yeah, it's confused, but it appears that the government accused Robert Driscoll, Butina's lawyer, of suggesting spuriously that an order of protection would be necessary. Golly. I'm a little vague as to who would be issuing the story. So were they, apparently. They messed up the capitalization on their tabs. Golly. What else is on here? Oh, look at that. That didn't happen. Come back. Little Shiva. Oh, that's wrong. Well, things tear on. Now, as I have stated before, there is a nomenclatural problem haunting the left of the Democratic Party, and it has to do with that thing that ends in ism. And I'm going to make my pitch one more time, because as it happens, is that right? Is it? Yeah. we're behind the curve on the Skype stuff today, so we're just not going to be able to do that, unfortunately. So that being the case, we're going to run a 2-hour show again today. Next week, maybe, I hope. But now let me talk to you one more time about the word social. And again, my preferred term for what's getting called socialism, social thought. It's a little awkward. What are you an adherent of in terms of governance? Social thought. I don't know. It's not the worst notion ever, I don't suppose. If someone can come up with a better thing that has social in it and doesn't end in ism, I'd like to hear it. The socialism is going to continue to be a problem no matter how often everybody says, oh, we don't mean that we plan to take your rum factory. There are enough people in this country who, for good or ill, do remember the taking of rum factories and the like, and telling them over and over and over again that simply isn't relevant to the current modus of socialism is just not going to work. And the sad toxin of their concerns, it diffuses through the body politic to where, at minimum, there's terrible suspicion of it. I was reminded of this just reading around the other day, comments sections and some of the list of, incidentally, NewYorkMag.com is just their comment section. The one for Andrew Sullivan in particular is just beyond belief. The level of right-wing trollage that takes place on that is just mind-numbing. But you recall that I mentioned earlier about the Roswell homeowners who won't let their millage rates be increased in keeping with their home's values, chiefly because it's just plain it's too much. They say, always. Some are poor-mouthing, some are retirees. Yeah, some are lying, some are telling the truth. But they all hate the idea of taxes more than anything else, and that's because they have, even when it would benefit them, no social thought. That's not functioning for them. They have had just basically siphoned out of their bodies through the prevalent and largely purchased climate of opinion of the last half century. It had fellow feeling that would help them just drained out of them. They can't see that there's a fundamental problem with housing being put in a chain of funding for education. Now, I understand the logic from an earlier time when, among other things, schools were segregated. And there was some sense that the pool of the community would sufficiently defray the cost of the schools. Well, it sufficiently defrayed the cost of some of the schools to be pretty good, and for others of the schools to be terrible. And actually, it's still the case, except that the public schools are now all, not all, but in very substantial measure, badly off for much the same racialist motivations that that produced separate and unequal regimes in education then. They just can't connect the dots. And I honestly do believe this is largely training, but there's the fact of it. It's not going to come to anyone through education. At this stage of things, only lively public discourse, suggesting basically, this is a phrase I'm sure the Opportunity 2020 types like, that you're entitled. You are entitled. I don't know how long it will be before a substantial number of Democrats can stand up and say, yeah, well, hell yeah, you are entitled to this decent minimum just for being human and living legally, and in some cases, problematically so, within the confines of the United States of America. End of discussion. It's going to be a long time till it gets there. It may never get there. That is, to be perfectly candid, one object in extremis of the activity of the general welfare tendency. A clease needs to be arrived at. These Opportunity 2020 types and your warmed over Clintonistas and your people who say, gosh, that John Kasich guy sounds like he's got some really good ideas. Really? Then I guess you liked Jack Kemp too. No relation. There's another guy named Kemp who is really famous in Anglophone history. Will Kemp. He was a clown. Anyway, God, I'm just out of stuff. We'll talk more next week. Until then, shall not be infringed.